The clinking of glasses stopped when he said it. "Navy trash!" My father repeated his voice, cutting through the laughter like a sharp wave slapping steel. "That's what she is? Couldn't hack it in real service. Isn't that right, sweetheart?" The ballroom froze. The chandeliers shimmered above us, catching the light like the medals he still wore on his chest, a retired captain who couldn't stop reliving his glory days. His groomsmen, most of the men who'd once served under him, burst out laughing, their laughter heavy with scotch and nostalgia. I stood there with a champagne flute in my hand, my reflection trembling in the golden fizz. He thought he was being funny. He always did. What they didn't know was that in less than 48 hours, every single one of those men would be standing at attention under my command. Because I, Grace Turner, the Navy Trash, had just been appointed commanding officer of the USS Valor, the destroyer they were contracted to support. But that night, I didn't say a word. The reception was everything my father loved: expensive, loud, self-congratulatory. His third wedding. The bride, a woman barely older than me, kept her smile pinned like a medal. The band played Anchors Away between pop songs, because of course it did. I watched my father hold court among his guests, retelling old war stories, inflating them until he became a myth. He'd always been larger than life. Captain Robert Turner, U.S. Navy, retired. To him, the Navy was a bloodline, and I'd betrayed it by daring to exist as his daughter in uniform. I sipped my drink, counting the seconds. 1, 2, 3. The laughter rolled on. "Come on, Grace!" One of his groomsmen, a red-faced man named Hawkins, called out. "Tell us what it's like to be desk duty these days. Must be easy compared to what your old man handled." I smiled. "Oh, it's tough," I said softly. "Lots of paperwork, but it keeps the ships afloat." They didn't get the joke? In truth, I'd just returned from deployment, 7 months in the Mediterranean running anti-piracy operations. My crew had trusted me with their lives, and I'd trusted them with mine. But to my father, none of that mattered. To him, I'd never be more than the little girl who'd played Navy. He raised his glass again. "To my daughter," he declared, "may she one day find herself a real sailor." The laughter erupted louder this time. His bride looked uncomfortable, glancing at me, but said nothing. I caught my reflection in the mirror behind the bar shoulders, straight uniform posture, even in civilian clothes. The daughter of a captain, the commander he didn't know he'd raised. I raised my glass too. "To second chances," I said. My voice was steady, even warm. The room fell silent for half a heartbeat before the music swelled again. Inside, my pulse was steady, my training kicking in. Maintain bearing. After dinner, I stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the Chesapeake Bay. The night was cold, the air filled with the sound of distant gulls and lapping waves. Below, the water gleamed black, endless, familiar. I'd joined the Navy at 21 to prove him wrong. I'd stayed because the sea made sense when he didn't. Out there, rank meant something. Effort meant something. Respect wasn't inherited, it was earned. My mother used to say he wasn't cruel, just incapable of softness. She left when I was 15, tired of competing with the Navy for his affection. I stayed desperate to earn it. And for years, I chased that ghost through storms, deployments, commendations, until I realized something painful. He'd taught me everything I needed to surpass him. Later that night, I found myself near the bandstand listening to an old sailor song. My father approached, loosened tie eyes glassy with bourbon. "You know I was just kidding, right?" he said, grinning. "You take things too damn seriously." I looked up at him, the man who'd built his life around command, but never mastered compassion. "Maybe," I said quietly, "but you taught me seriousness, remember?" He frowned, uncertain how to read me. "You always were too soft for the Navy," he muttered. "All heart, no edge." I smiled again, small and sharp. "You'll find I've got both." He laughed, clapped me on the shoulder, and stumbled away to rejoin his men. Midnight came. The crowd thinned. I slipped out, heels in hand, walking barefoot along the bay. The wind carried the scent of salt and diesel, the perfume of home. In the distance, The faint silhouette of a destroyer sat docked under security lights. My ship, my command, the USS Valor. Tomorrow I'd report aboard officially as her new CO. My crew didn't know yet. Neither did my father or his friends, who'd been hired as civilian consultants for the ship's systems refit. The irony was poetic. I stopped at the pier and whispered into the night a habit from my earliest days at Sea Watch over me, old man. Then after a beat, I added, and tried to keep up. The waves lapped against the rocks like applause. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the water, dark, fragmented, doubled by ripples. For the first time in years, I didn't see his shadow behind mine. The next time he called me Navy trash, I promised myself it would be followed by the sound of boots snapping to attention. And when that moment came, I'd give the order I'd been waiting my whole life to say. Drop and give me 50. The sea breeze whispered across the pier like a salute. The following morning, the Chesapeake was gray, and still the water a sheet of glass stretching toward the horizon. I stood on the pier in my dress blues duffel slung over one shoulder, watching the USS Valor emerge from the mist. Steel gray, broad-shouldered, built to endure, she looked every bit the warship I'd trained my whole career to command. And yet, for a moment, I hesitated. The Navy teaches you that command is a privilege, not a right, that a ship reflects her captain's character. Standing there, I wondered which reflection Valor would reveal, mine or my father's. Because make no mistake, his ghost lived in her bulkheads. The duty officer saluted sharply as I came aboard. "Permission to come aboard, ma'am." "Permission granted," I replied, returning the salute. The words felt both heavy and liberating. My first command. 12 years of service had led to this moment. The XO commander, John Jack McAdams, met me on the quarterdeck. A tall man in his late 40s, sun-beaten and squared away, the kind of sailor who'd seen it all. He'd served with my father years ago, though he didn't mention it. His eyes flickered with something unreadable when he saw my name tag. "Welcome aboard, Captain Turner," he said. "Crew standing by for inspection at SU 900. Engineering's behind on the refit schedule, but we'll catch up." "Good," I said. "We'll run a readiness drill by the end of the week." He nodded, but I caught the faintest twitch of surprise. They weren't used to urgency anymore. As I walked through the ship's narrow corridors, I noticed things my father would have called sloppy, paint scuffed, lockers unlatched, the kind of wear that comes not from hard use, but from complacency. Sailors greeted me with polite smiles, but there was an undercurrent, half curiosity, half skepticism. News travels fast on a ship. A female CO newly appointed stepping into a crew packed with veterans who'd served under her father's command that was bound to stir opinions. I entered the wardroom to find 3 civilian contractors discussing engine upgrades over coffee. Hawkins, one of my father's groomsmen, was among them. He didn't recognize me at first. "Can we help you, ma'am?" "Just passing through," I said evenly. He squinted. "Hey, weren't you at the captain's wedding?" "Yes," I said. "Family friend?" He laughed, nudging his buddy. "Guess the captain's got fans all over the base." I smiled thinly. "You could say that." Later in my cabin, I unpacked the essentials, my father's old compass, a photo of my academy class, and a small leather notebook. Inside were pages of notes, crew reports, personnel files, behavioral assessments. I'd spent the weekend reviewing them. Discipline was uneven. Morale middling, leadership fractured. The worst patterns came from the upper deck, the same men my father had mentored. Their influence still clung to this ship like old oil, crude jokes, outdated attitudes, the kind of quiet rot that seeps into the hull long before anyone notices. I sat at my desk running my fingers over the brass nameplate freshly installed outside my cabin, CMDR Grace Turner Co. USS Valor. The letters gleamed in the light. Mine. Finally, mine. And yet, all I could hear was his voice. "You'll never make command, Gracie. Not with that bleeding heart of yours." That night, I walked the deck under a bruised sky. The harbor lights flickered across the waves. Down below, sailors worked through the night shift welding and testing. Their laughter carried faintly on the wind, human, unguarded, real. I envied their simplicity, the way they served without ghosts following them. I stopped at the rail, touching the cold steel. "You and me, Valor," I murmured. "Let's make this work." Behind me, footsteps. Chief Elena Cruz emerged from the shadows, a compact woman with salt and pepper hair and the calm presence of someone who'd earned every stripe. "Evening, ma'am," she said. "Evening, Chief. Can't sleep?" She gave a faint smile. "Been on ships too long. They creak when they dream." I chuckled softly. "That they do." Cruz leaned against the rail. "Cruz curious about you. Word's going around you've got high standards." "I do," I said. "You think that'll be a problem?" Her eyes glinted. "Only for the ones who've been coasting. The rest. They'll follow you anywhere once they see you mean what you say." I studied her for a moment. She was testing me, measuring if I had substance behind the title. "I'll need your help, Chief," I said. "There's old habits here that need unlearning." "Then we'll unlearn them," she said simply. It was the first time since stepping aboard that I felt the ground steady beneath me. At 0600 the next morning, I ran laps around the deck as the sun rose. The air was crisp, carrying that briny sting unique to naval ports. The ship felt alive beneath my boots. Every clang of metal, every hum of machinery reminded me command wasn't a prize. It was a responsibility. McAdams joined me mid-lap, surprising me. "Crew's talking," he said between breaths, "wondering what kind of CO you'll be." I glanced at him. "And what kind is that?" He smiled wryly. "The kind who still believes a ship can be better than its crew, or the kind who knows the crew makes the ship." I didn't answer right away. "Maybe both," I said finally. He nodded, thoughtful. "Then you might just pull this off." By Aero 800, the crew assembled on deck for the first inspection. Rows of sailors in crisp uniforms, faces young and old. I walked past each one, slowly, eyes steady, voice even. "Discipline starts with pride," I said. "Not pride in rank, but in the ship, in each other." Some nodded, others avoided my gaze. Hawkins stood near the back trying to mask his smirk. I let it pass. There would be time for lessons later. As I dismissed the crew, Cruz lingered beside me. "You handled them well," she said. "I've had practice," I replied. She tilted her head. "With your father." I met her gaze. Exactly. The wind shifted, then carrying the faint scent of oil and salt, and something else changed. For the first time in years, I felt ready. Command wasn't about power, it was about patience. And patience, I'd learned, could be the sharpest weapon of all. When you inherit a command, you don't just inherit a ship. You inherit the ghosts that came before you. On the Valor, there were plenty. They lived in the way sailors spoke my father's name, half in awe, half in exhaustion. They lived in the framed photo still hanging in the wardroom, Captain Robert Turner, Commanding Officer, USS Valor, 1998-2002. I hadn't asked for that photo to stay up, but when I saw it, something inside me tightened. He was younger there, smiling in uniform. The same man who once told me I'd never lead. The same man whose old crew still lingered aboard as civilian contractors and consultants, shaping the ship in their own image. And now, his daughter was here to clean up what he'd left behind. By midweek, I'd begun to see how deep the habits ran. The junior sailors were sharp, respectful, and eager to learn. But above them, some of the chiefs, the old-timers who'd served with my father, were content to coast. They cut corners, blamed the Navy's new standards, and filled the air with jokes that hadn't been funny since 1985. It wasn't overt insubordination. It was subtler. A shrug here, a smirk there, the lingering assumption that command was a man's job, and I was merely a temporary inconvenience. I'd seen it before. I knew how to handle it. You don't fight rot by shouting. You starve it of oxygen. So I listened. I watched. I took notes. At Aero 900 on Wednesday, I walked into engineering. The smell of diesel and sweat hit me like a memory. Hawkins was there again, leaning against a console with two others, coffee in hand, explaining to a younger sailor why women weren't built for Navy life. I stood in the doorway long enough for silence to find them. "Morning, gentlemen," I said, voice cool, steady. They froze. One mumbled, "Morning, ma'am." Hawkins recovered first, giving me a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Just discussing operational readiness, Captain." "I'm sure you were." I crossed my arms. Operational readiness begins with respect. Make sure you're fluent in both before 1800. His grin faltered. The younger sailor tried not to smile. I left without another word. Small corrections like adjusting trim in a storm. You don't steer with anger, you steer with precision. In the mess that afternoon, Cruz joined me with her tray. "Words traveling fast," she said. "Engineering's been very quiet since your visit." "Good," I said. "Let them talk. Let them wonder." She studied me. "You remind me of your father sometimes. The posture, the tone." That hit harder than she meant. Let's hope the similarities end there. Cruz nodded slowly. "He was a legend, you know. Rough man, but his sailors would have followed him through fire." "I know," I said. "I was one of them once." That night, I reviewed crew reports alone in my cabin. Each line item told a story. Late drills, maintenance delays, disciplinary notes that had been quietly ignored. The ship had been running on nostalgia, not discipline. I found myself whispering aloud, "You built them in your image, didn't you, Dad?" The silence answered. A knock at my door startled me. It was McAdams. "Permission to speak freely, Captain." "Always," I said. He stepped in, closing the door behind him. "You're making waves. Hawkins and his group are grumbling. Says you're trying to prove a point." "Maybe I am," I said. "Look," he sighed. "I served under your father. He was old school. The crew worshipped him, but he ruled with fear. You lead differently, and that's good. Just remember, sailors can't follow a secret. They need to know what kind of captain you are." I leaned back. "Then I'll show them, not tell them." He nodded slowly, half a smile flickering. "Fair enough." By Friday, the mood aboard Valor had shifted. Not much, just small ripples. The petty officers stood a little straighter. Drills ran smoother. Even the jokes grew quieter. Cruz stopped by my cabin late that evening. "You've done in 4 days what the last CO couldn't in 4 months," she said. I smiled faintly. "We've got a long way to go." She hesitated at the doorway. "The men who served under your father? They're not all bad, Captain. Just loyal to a version of the Navy that doesn't exist anymore." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm here." Cruz paused. "You ever miss being just another sailor? Before the rank, the weight?" I thought of the academy days, white uniforms, salt wind, endless drills. I thought of the simpler version of me, who still believed my father's approval was the highest honor. "Every day," I said softly, "but command isn't about what you miss. It's about what you carry." She nodded. "Aye, Captain." That night, sleep didn't come easy. I dreamed of the old Valor when my father commanded her. I was 17 then, watching from the dock as she departed on deployment. He'd promised to send letters. He didn't. In the dream, the ship drifted without a captain, crew lost compass spinning. When I woke, the ship was quiet. Her engines a steady heartbeat. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, the words echoing in my mind. "You can't lead if you're still following ghosts." The next morning, I made my first official announcement over the intercom. "Attention, all hands," I said, my voice steady over the ship's speakers. "Effective immediately, the Valor will begin full combat readiness drills. We'll hold ourselves to the highest standard because that's what this ship deserves. If you wear her patch, you represent something greater than nostalgia. You represent the Navy's future." A pause. Then quietly, "Let's make her proud again." I set the mic down and exhaled. Through the open window, I heard the faint echo of movement boots on steel sailors assembling. Somewhere, my father's photo watched from the wardroom wall. But this time, I didn't look away. Because his command was the past, and mine had just begun. They say every captain earns their command twice, once on paper and once in front of their crew. For me, that second test came on a Tuesday morning when the sun burned red through the mist and the sea lay flat as glass. The deck was lined with sailors, their uniforms crisp, their faces expectant. Even the contractors had been ordered to attend. Hawkins stood among them, sunglasses tucked into his collar arms, crossed in quiet arrogance. He didn't know what was coming. None of them did. The XO McAdams stood to my right, clipboard in hand. His tone was neutral, almost ceremonial. All hands' attention to announcement of command. The ship's loudspeaker crackled. By order of Naval Command, effective immediately, the USS Valor is now under the command of... I stepped forward before the officer could finish. Commander Grace Turner, I said, my voice cutting across the deck, reporting for duty. A ripple moved through the ranks. Murmurs, disbelief, a few audible gasps. Hawkins's jaw actually dropped. Someone in the back whispered, "No way." But there was no mistaking it. I was in full dress whites, the gold insignia gleaming against my collar, my father's old compass clipped inside my pocket. For a moment, silence ruled the deck, the kind of silence that demands something be said, but no one dares to say it. I took a step forward. Some of you know my father, Captain Robert Turner. Some of you served under him. You remember his standards, his discipline, his pride in this ship. A few heads nodded. I could feel the weight of their memories pressing against me. I carry those lessons, I continued, but I'm not here to repeat them. I'm here to build something better. A pause. The wind caught the edge of the flag above us, snapping it like punctuation. I looked straight at Hawkins. Discipline isn't nostalgia, it's respect. Respect for the ship, for the sea, and for each other. Then, with calm precision, I said the words that had been sitting at the back of my throat since the wedding night. Drop and give me 50. The air tightened. For a split second, Hawkins blinked in disbelief. Then McAdams barked, "You heard the captain down." Dozens of sailors hit the deck palms, flat on the steel, moving in rhythm, 50 push-ups under the sun. Hawkins hesitated only a second before dropping 2. His face red, his pride bleeding out through his sweat. I walked the line, slowly, boots echoing against the hull. "We start fresh today," I said. "No more shortcuts, no more ghosts. The Valor earns her name back one push-up at a time." Afterward, I dismissed the crew and returned to my cabin. The adrenaline still thrummed under my skin, but it wasn't satisfaction. I felt it was gravity. Command is never about revenge. It's about what comes after. Cruz knocked once and entered a small grin breaking through her otherwise stoic expression. "That was something, Captain." "Too much?" I asked. "Exactly enough," she said. "You didn't humiliate them. You reminded them who's in charge." I nodded, leaning back in my chair. "You think they'll follow me?" "They already are," she said. "They just don't know it yet." By noon, the crew's energy had shifted. The usual grumbling faded. Conversations turned from mockery to curiosity. Hawkins passed me in the corridor later that day. He stopped, saluted sharply, then met my eyes. "Ma'am," he said quietly. "Didn't realize who you were?" "I know," I said. "Now you do." He hesitated. Permission to speak freely. "Granted." He exhaled. "I served under your old man. Hell, I worshipped him. Never thought anyone could fill those boots." "I'm not here to fill them," I said. "I'm here to walk my own path. And if you're smart, you'll walk with me." He nodded, humbled. "Aye, Captain." Later, during the daily briefing, McAdams handed me a report. "We've got a readiness drill scheduled tomorrow. Command wants to see how the crew performs under pressure." "Good," I said. "We'll make it count." He studied me for a moment. "You surprised them today, including me." "I wasn't trying to," I said. "Just setting the tone." He smiled faintly. "Your father used to set the tone by throwing a wrench across the engine room." "I prefer words," I said. He chuckled. "You're more dangerous than he ever was." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I stood alone on the deck. The ship moved gently against the tide, the world tinted orange and gold. The Valor felt different now, alive, awake. I thought about my father again, about the wedding, about the decades he'd spent shaping men like Hawkins into reflections of himself. And now his daughter commanded them. A gust of wind tore through my hair. I whispered into it, "You taught me how to lead, Dad. You just never thought I'd lead you." The next morning, I made a quiet inspection of the lower decks. The crew saluted crisply. The ship hummed with efficiency. Crews caught up to me near the mess. "The men are calling you the ghost captain," she said with a grin. "Because of my father." "Because you don't shout," she said. "You haunt." I laughed softly. "I'll take it." She leaned closer. "You've got them where you want them, Captain. But the real test's coming. The readiness drill's going to push them hard. You ready for that?" I looked out across the water, the horizon, a clean line against the sky. "I've been ready my whole life." That night in my cabin, I opened my father's old compass. The needle spun for a second before settling north. The engraving on the back read, "Honor above all." I traced the letters with my thumb. For him, honor had meant pride. For me, it meant something quieter, responsibility. The sea outside whispered against the hull, steady, endless. And for the first time since taking command, I felt the weight lift just slightly. Because command, I realized, isn't inherited. It's proven moment by moment, order by order. And I had just begun. The readiness drill began at dawn, the kind of morning where the sea looked deceptively calm, like glass hiding 1,000 unseen currents beneath. I was on deck before the call to stations even sounded coffee, in hand wind biting across my face. General quarters, all hands to battle stations. The ship came alive instantly. Sirens blared, boots thundered across steel. Voices echoed through the corridors, clipped and sharp. I watched the crew move some fluid, some fumbling. Hawkins barked orders from the engine bay. Crews handled communications, and McAdams monitored logistics. The Valor hadn't seen a proper combat simulation in months. Command had scheduled this as a performance review. For me, it was something more a crucible. The first half hour went well enough. Systems check navigation drills, simulated threat responses, all by the book. But then, as fate or irony would have it, the unexpected hit. Engine room reporting. "Coolant leak, ma'am. Real one this time. Not simulation." McAdams' eyes flicked to me. "We abort the drill." I shook my head. "No, we adapt." He hesitated. "That's risky, Captain." "So is command," I said. We descended to the engine room. The heat was brutal, the air thick with the tang of fuel. Hawkins was kneeling beside a leaking valve, shouting instructions. "Pressure's climbing fast," he yelled. I crouched beside him, scanning the gauges. Years of training of wrench turning and watch standing came back like muscle memory. I pointed. "Bypass the main manifold seal off Sector 3, reroute coolant through auxiliary lines. Now." He blinked. "Ma'am, that's a direct order," I cut in. He didn't argue. Crews coordinated over the comms, directing the engineering crew. Within minutes, the hiss of escaping pressure eased. The reading stabilized. The crisis passed. When the system's hum settled back into rhythm, Hawkins leaned against the bulkhead, sweat streaking his face. "Damn, Captain," he said quietly. "That was some call." "Experience," I replied. "Not luck." Back on the bridge, the XO handed me a printout. "Drills resumed. Command's watching live. They'll want a report." "Let them watch," I said. The rest of the simulation ran perfectly. The Valor maneuvered like a living thing crew in sync orders, crisp and sharp. The men who'd mocked me just days before were now moving under my voice without hesitation. By the time we stood down, the sun had broken through the clouds, casting golden light across the water. Crews approached tablet in hand. "Command sends their compliments, ma'am. Efficiency up 30% from last quarter." I smiled faintly. "Not bad for Navy trash?" She grinned. "You said it, not me." Later that evening, I gathered the senior officers in the wardroom. The tension was different now. Less resistance, more curiosity. "We've proven we can handle drills," I began. "Now we prove we can handle each other." Hawkins spoke first. "Permission to speak freely, Captain." "Go ahead." "I was wrong," he said simply. "About you. About everything." A few others nodded. The weight of their admission hung in the air, not contrition exactly, but something close to respect. "Apology accepted," I said. But remember this, I didn't come here to make anyone feel small. I came to make this ship great again. You can be part of that, or you can get left behind. McAdams raised a brow. Sounds like your father talking. I met his eyes, maybe, but I mean it differently. He nodded slowly. You've got their attention now, Captain. Don't lose it. Later that night, crews joined me on deck. The stars stretched endless overhead, the kind of sight that makes even the most hardened sailor feel small. Word is spreading, she said. The crew's proud again. Even the skeptics are coming around. I leaned against the railing. Pride can be dangerous. Not when it's earned, she countered. We stood in silence for a while, listening to the steady rhythm of the sea. Then she asked the question I'd been avoiding since day one. Do you think your father would have approved? I hesitated. No, but maybe that's the point. The next day brought an unexpected message. Rear Admiral Robert Turner Rhett, scheduled to board USS Valor for inspection. My father? The irony hit me like a wave. After years of absence of words, left sharp and unhealed, he was coming aboard my ship. Crews caught the look on my face. You okay? Define okay, I said. He's still your dad, she said softly. Yeah, I murmured. And now he's about to see what Navy trash looks like in command whites. That night, I barely slept. I reread the inspection protocol twice, then stared out the cabin window at the dark horizon. Memories flickered his booming laugh, his critiques the way he'd stand ramrod straight even off duty. He'd wanted a son to follow in his wake. He got a daughter who had to carve her own path. And now she outranked him. The next morning, when the transport vessel arrived, I was already on deck. The crew stood at attention, uniforms immaculate. The moment he stepped aboard, the air seemed to shift, still proud, still commanding, but slower now, weighted by age. Permission to come aboard, he said. Permission granted, Admiral, I replied evenly. He studied me, his eyes narrowing just slightly. Then with a small nod, he stepped forward. You wear it well, Commander. Thank you, sir. We walked the decks together, our words clipped but civil. He inspected systems, questioned crew, and offered the occasional gruff approval. Finally, we ended up on the bridge, the same place I'd once stood as a terrified ensign under his command. He looked out across the sea. You've done well, he said at last. I had a good teacher, I replied. He smiled faintly. And one hell of a student. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said the words I'd never expected to hear. I was wrong about you, Grace. The air caught in my chest. Sir, he turned to face me. You didn't just follow orders. You became the kind of officer this Navy needs, and the kind of daughter I should have been proud of all along. For the first time in years, I didn't have a reply. Carry on, Commander, he said quietly. And then he saluted me. Not as a father, but as an equal. The sea outside stretched endless, shimmering with late sunlight. I felt something shift deep inside a knot. Untied, a burden eased. Respect, earned not demanded. Maybe that's what real command was all along. The storm rolled in faster than forecast. By dusk, the horizon was swallowed by black water and the kind of wind that made the whole ship groan in protest. We were 90 miles off Norfolk, escorting a training convoy, when the first squall line hit. I was on the bridge when the radar started to bloom red. Ma'am, we're tracking 60-knot gusts. An increasing cruise reported voice tight. Secure all decks, double-check tie-downs, and notify engineering, I ordered. We ride it out. A storm at sea has a way of stripping away pretense. No rank, no pride, no past, just survival and instinct. Within minutes, the Valor was in the thick of it. Rain slammed against the windows like gunfire. Lightning cracked close enough to illuminate the waves 30 feet high, white-capped and furious. Engine pressure dropping came a shout from below. I gripped the console. Get Hawkins on it. Crews adjusted the rudder manually, fighting the wheel as the ship pitched hard to port. She's heavy, ma'am. Feels like we're dragging something. I glanced at the readings. Ballast is off. We're uneven. McAdams, soaked from a quick inspection, rushed in. We've got flooding on deck 2, starboard side. Seal it and reroute, I barked. Pump out what you can. Another wave smashed against the hull, sending a shudder through the deck plates. The ship's internal alarm screamed in chorus. Somewhere below, metal groaned, the unmistakable sound of strain under pressure. "Bridge to engineering," I called. "Report status." Hawkins's voice came through barely audible over static. "We're holding, but if this keeps up, then we'll hold harder," I snapped. "Keep her alive, Chief." The storm raged for hours, a relentless assault of noise and motion. My officers looked exhausted, running on adrenaline and instinct. But through it all, they obeyed every command without hesitation. Even McAdams, the same man who once doubted me, now moved like an extension of my will. No sarcasm, no skepticism, just trust. When a sudden power flicker hit the bridge, I grabbed the emergency mic. "All hands, this is the captain. Stay at your posts. We've been through worse seas than this. We hold steady. We are the U.S. Navy, and this ship does not break." A quiet murmur followed across the comms, a strange kind of courage spreading like static. Then, through the downpour, I heard something over the radio that froze me. A faint voice, weak, panicked. "This is the Burlington. We've lost propulsion. Taking on water. We need assistance." A supply vessel from our convoy, dead in the water directly in the storm's path. McAdams turned to me. "They'll capsize if they don't get a tow." I met his eyes, prepped the rescue line. Cruz hesitated. "Ma'am, that's suicide in these conditions." "So was joining the Navy," I said. Minutes later, I was on deck, rain pelting my face like needles. The wind howled the deck slick beneath my boots. Hawkins and 3 others fought to secure the line, their faces pale under the flickering floodlights. The Burlington loomed in and out of the darkness, barely visible between the crashing waves. "Easy," I shouted. "Wait for the swell now." They heaved the line across. It caught. I grabbed the railing knuckles white as the Valor strained against the drag. "Engines at 50%, Hawkins yelled over the roar. "Any more, and she'll rip." "Hold it there," I shouted back. The deck pitched violently, knocking one sailor off his footing. I caught his wrist just before he went over. The surge nearly took us both, but Cruz was there, hauling us in with brute force. "Thanks," I gasped. She grinned through the rain. "Don't mention it." After what felt like an eternity, the Burlington signal steadied. They were secure. Their pumps were working again. Slowly, painfully, we towed them back into safer waters. When the storm finally began to ease, the crew's exhaustion was written on every face, but so was pride. "Damage report," I asked once we were steady. McAdams handed me a clipboard. "Minor flooding. A few electrical systems fried. But considering what we just did..." He exhaled. "Hell of a job, Captain." I looked around the bridge. My crew. "We did it together," I said simply. By morning, the sea had turned calm again, the surface still and deceptively gentle. The Valor glided toward port, her hull scarred but intact. As we docked, I saw him waiting on the pier, my father in his weathered dress coat standing ramrod straight. He saluted as I descended the gangway. I returned it. The gesture was clean formal, but his eyes said something more. "Hell of a night," he said. Could say that I replied. He studied me. "You didn't call for help." "I didn't need to," I said quietly. "We had it handled." He nodded, slowly, pride flickering behind his stoic mask. "That's command, Grace. Knowing when to trust your crew and yourself." He paused. "Your mother would have been proud." That hit harder than any storm. "Thank you, sir," I said, voice steadier than I felt. Then to my shock, he stepped forward and hugged me. Brief, awkward, but real. "I was too hard on you," he muttered. "You didn't deserve that." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You taught me to survive it, sir." He pulled back, smiling faintly. "You always were the better officer." Later in my cabin, I looked out at the calm water, the sunrise painting gold over the waves. The ship creaked softly beneath me, alive, resilient. I thought about the crew once. Doubtful, now devoted. About my father, once a critic, now an equal. And about myself, the woman who had spent her whole life trying to earn respect only to realize she'd built it one storm at a time. Cruz knocked lightly on the door. "Command just called, ma'am. They're recommending a commendation." "For the crew?" I asked. "For you, Captain," she said. "Bravery under fire." I smiled. "Then they'll share it. All of them." She nodded. "I figured you'd say that." Outside, the Valor's bell rang for morning colors. The flag climbed slow and steady into the light. Somewhere behind me, I could almost hear my father's voice again, not mocking this time, but proud, almost reverent. And for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The sea, the ship, the name I'd once been ashamed of, all finally my own. The Navy has a saying, calm seas never made a skilled sailor. I'd lived through my share of storms on the ocean in command and within my own family. But in the months that followed, the hardest part wasn't the fight. It was the quiet that came after. The Valor had become a legend among the fleet for that storm rescue. Awards came down from the brass, reporters called for interviews, and the crew suddenly found themselves minor celebrities in Norfolk. They deserved every bit of it. But fame was never my goal. I'd spent my life proving something to my father, to the Navy, maybe to myself, and now for the first time I felt done proving. I visited him every Sunday after that night. Same coffee shop near the pier, same booth by the window. He'd already be there, 2 black coffees on the table. "You're late?" he'd say, even if I was 5 minutes early. "Traffic," I'd answer. Then we'd sit, watching the ships pass through the harbor, both pretending we weren't the sentimental types. It took weeks before he finally said it, the thing I think he'd been carrying for decades. "I pushed you too hard because I saw myself in you." He stirred his coffee without looking up. "Didn't want you to make my mistakes." I smiled. "You mean letting pride ruin everything good in your life?" That earned me his first laugh in years, something like that. We talked for hours that day about command, regret, legacy. And when I left, he stood to attention, saluted me one last time, then said, "You're doing it right, Commander. Keep doing it right." Back on the Valor, life returned to its rhythm. Training drills, inspections, new recruits who'd heard the story and stared at me like I was part myth. Cruz became my XO officially, and McAdams, well, he stayed my most loyal officer. He'd never say it, but I caught the look sometimes, the quiet respect that comes only from being proven wrong, and grateful for it. One afternoon, we were running readiness exercises when I noticed a young ensign struggling with the navigation chart. Her hand shook as she tried to plot a course. "Ensign Avery," I said, walking over, "take a breath. What's the problem?" She stammered, "Ma'am, I'm just nervous. Don't want to mess up in front of you." I leaned beside her, studying the chart. "You think I didn't feel that way once?" She blinked. "You, ma'am." "Oh, absolutely. First time I took the helm, I nearly steered us into a buoy." Her eyes widened. "What did your CO do?" I smiled. "He told me to fix it. So I did." Avery laughed, the tension gone. "Thanks, ma'am." "Don't thank me," I said. "Just learn. And one day, when it's your turn to lead, remember how it felt to be afraid and how someone helped you through it." She nodded, and I saw it, that spark I used to chase in myself, the one that believed leadership wasn't about rank. It was about example. Months passed. Promotions came and went. The Valor received a presidential commendation for heroism during the storm, and the crew was invited to D.C. for a ceremony. I wore my dress whites, the same ones I'd been mocked for at my father's wedding months before. When I looked in the mirror before stepping on stage, I thought of that night, the laughter, the humiliation, the long road between then and now. The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. For exceptional bravery and leadership under extreme conditions, Commander Grace Holloway, U.S. Navy. Applause thundered. My crew stood to attention. And in the front row, my father, old proud tears barely hidden, rose to salute me. I returned it steady and sure. The crowd faded away for a moment. It was just us 2 officers, 2 generations, 2 Holloways, finally on the same side. After the ceremony, a reporter approached me backstage. "Commander Holloway," she said, notebook in hand. What's the biggest lesson the Navy has taught you? I thought for a moment. That strength isn't about shouting the loudest or winning every fight. It's about patience, discipline, knowing when to listen and when to lead. She smiled. That's a rare answer. It's a rare lesson, I said. That night, I went for a walk along the docks. The city lights shimmered across the calm water. The Valor was out to sea again, her new CO at the helm, one of my former lieutenants. I'd taken a desk post at the academy mentoring young officers. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt right. I finally understood what my father had meant about legacy. It's not what you leave behind, but who. A group of midshipmen jogged past me on their evening PT. One saw my uniform and instinctively called out ma'am permission to speak freely. I nodded. Ma'am, were you really the CO who ordered her crew to drop and give 50 at a wedding? I laughed. That's one way to put it. He grinned. Legendary, ma'am. As they ran off, I shook my head. My legend, my storm, my story. Weeks later, I got a letter from one of my old sailors now stationed in the Pacific. He wrote, "You once said command wasn't about fear. It was about faith. I didn't understand it then. I do now. Every order I give, I think about that storm and how you never flinched. Thank you for teaching me what real strength looks like." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my journal right beside a photo of my crew on the Valor. Below it, another photo, me and my father standing together on the pier, both saluting the same flag. The sea has a strange way of humbling and healing those who live by it. It takes what's weak, tempers it, and gives it back stronger. My revenge had never been about humiliation. Not really. It was about truth, showing the world and myself that dignity doesn't come from proving others wrong. It comes from living right. My father's words returned to me as I watched the sun dip below the horizon that evening. Command isn't about power. It's about responsibility. And sometimes the hardest person to command is yourself. He was right. So I smiled, saluted the setting sun, and whispered quietly to the wind, "Aye, sir." If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own battles, your own storms, your own lessons, learn the hard way. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it salutes.